Hello, everybody. It's time to take a look at Chapter 8 from your Woolfolk book, looking at different cognitive views of learning. So, what is the cognitive perspective? A cognitive view is a view that thinks of learning as an active mental process of acquiring, remembering, and then using knowledge. So cognitive psychologists assume that mental processes exist, that we can study them, and that humans are active information processors. So cognitive science is just the study of thinking and language and the brain. And cognition, which you've probably heard many times, is just the operation of multiple memory components interacting rapidly or simultaneously. What's the difference between the cognitive view of learning and the behavioral view? Well, the cognitive view focuses on the knowledge and the strategies that are learned, and the changes in knowledge and strategies that make behavior change possible. Whereas the behavioral view really focuses on behaviors themselves and how we learn those behaviors through either reinforcement or punishment, those kinds of things. We already talked during the first week of this class about the brain. So I'm just going to quickly go over a couple things about the brain that relate to cognitive learning. One is that the brain shapes and is shaped by cognitive processing activities, meaning that the way our brain works actually shapes how we think and process things and then how we learn. And that many of the developmental and brain changes that occur in our lifetimes involve knowledge. Knowledge is a key element in the cognitive perspective, the acquiring of knowledge, the memory of knowledge, and the learning. Let's take a look at attention and how attention factors into learning. So, selective attention limits what we will perceive and process. We attend to selected stimuli and we ignore others. And we can really only attend to one cognitively demanding task at a time, unless we're performing things with automaticity, which is the ability to perform thoroughly learned tasks without much mental effort. These processes initially require a lot of attention, like driving, but then they become automatic with practice. And attention and multitasking are related because it's sequential. We switch back and forth from one task to the other. That's what multitasking really is. It is not actually doing two things or multiple things at once. We're constantly switching back and forth. Simultaneous might be an overlapping focus on several tasks. So if I have asked you to read and take notes, you might be overlappingly focused on both of those things at one time, but you are still going to have to switch back and forth between the reading and the note-taking. And it's important to note that with multitasking, actually each task ends up taking longer because you end up repeating processes. So what you're really interested in likely is the relationship between attention and teaching. So in order for learning to take place, the first step is paying attention, but it requires more than just students' attention. Our resources as far as attention go are really limited. So we need students to be able to allocate more resources or attention to something, and that will improve their performance. And successful processing depends on the amount or quality of data available. And then finally, processing, the ability to kind of take in what we've done and then make meaning of it, that can happen without much attention. That's why you may have heard before that students can be learning something during the day, but it might not solidify until they're in their brain until they go to sleep. It's because that processing is an automated process for us. And factors in the classroom that influence student attention, well, you can gain attention more easily than maintaining attention. So that's why it's always best to chunk your teaching spells or chunk the amount of information that you're giving to students, because that initial gaining of their attention is much easier than maintaining attention over a long period of time. How should you do this? How should you get and maintain attention? Signals. Hand signals, visual cues, auditory cues. Avoid really distracting behaviors and use your voice to the ultimate of its ability. Whispering can be a verbal cue for students to cue in. Don't use too many signals. Have a small repertoire of signals that you use that students respond to. In my classroom, I always had a maraca. I also had a bell. And then depending on my school, I went along with things for their positive behavior systems, things like Give Me Five. Those sorts of things. Too many, and students will not pay attention. Too few, and it will become repetitive, and they will, again, not pay attention. The second point on this slide is to reach out rather than call out. Calling out students' names does not really work. It may work for a minute to gain the attention, but it's not going to help them maintain. So if you need to get the attention of a particular child, you need to walk to that child, use their name, and look them in the eyes. That's one of the only ways that you're really going to be able to ensure that you have their attention for longer than just the time it takes you to say their name. If you want to maintain students' attention, you have to make sure that the purpose of the lesson or task is clear to them. There should be goals or objectives that are either on the board or discussed, or both. And they should also know what the point is, why they're actually learning. That's going to help them be more invested in what you're doing. Incorporate variety, curiosity, and surprise. Change your physical space up as much as you can. Utilize your room, utilize what you have around you, and use various sensory channels. Think about your exposure of the 5 senses and whether you're hitting those senses with your students on a daily basis. And then finally, you can gain and maintain attention just by asking questions and then providing frames for answering. That helps students self-check. Is my answer in the frame that my teacher was asking me to do? It helps them self-edit. Is my answer related to what my teacher actually asked? And then another idea is that they work in pairs so they can work off of each other. I do something called Turn to Teach, which means that one student reads one thing, another student reads another, and then they turn to each other and they have 1 minute to teach the main idea to the other student. That's going to really maintain their attention while they're reading because they know what their goal is, and then it's going to maintain their attention while they're presenting because they're working face-to-face with someone and they are on a time limit so that they know, I'm not going to have to drag this out. I got to get it out in 1 minute. It's important to think about the cognitive load of a task because the cognitive load is the amount of resources that are necessary to complete the task. Our students need more to learn than just to attend to the thing that we've asked them to do. There are 3 kinds of cognitive load. The first is intrinsic. What are the resources required by the task itself? The second is extraneous. What are the resources required to process the stimuli that are irrelevant to the task? And the last is germane. What are the deep processing needs related to the task, including how to apply prior knowledge to the new task? A prime example of this is a word problem in math. We've given them the problem. There's an intrinsic cognitive load. They have to solve this math problem that's embedded in these words. The extraneous things are, number one, whatever's going on in the room around them. Number two, whatever's going on in their head that is affecting them. But number three, it's all those words that are surrounding the math problem that the students don't actually need. And then germane, the deep processing related to the task, including the application of prior knowledge. Oh, I see the word more, and more means add. That's my prior knowledge, so I know how to process this problem. I'm going to need to add something up. How can you get families involved in helping their students learn? Well, different strategies you can use to help children practice and remember things that you've already taught them are to do a parent coaching card that has a memory strategy that parents can teach or reinforce to their children. Or provide a set of comprehension questions that parents and children can use together. You could ask family members to share their strategies for organizing and remembering. A lot of parents have great tricks for things like math facts or states and capitals, a lot of those automatic memory type things. And those are certainly usable and valid. It's also, they could create a family calendar by breaking tasks into small jobs. So this is more about the organizing of learning. If it's a bigger project the student has to do as a family together, they can say, okay, we have 30 minutes, we can work on it on Monday. Tuesday, you have hockey practice. We're not going to get to it. Wednesday, we can set aside 45 minutes before you go to bed, but after dinner, where we will, spend some time. And then Thursday, we'll just put on the finishing touches. Should take us about 10 minutes. That kind of thing can really help a student learn how to organize their time through the modeling from their family. And then it's important just with family to discuss the importance of attention. And we always encourage parents to give their children a study space away from home distractions. The kitchen table is not the best place to study if people are making meals and running around and things like that. Kids do not need their own desk in their own office quiet space, but they do need a space that's dedicated to studying in their home. And then we as teachers need to be responsible for informing parents of the purpose of homework. If something comes home, parents should see the value in it, and it's our job to make sure that they do. So after having read and listened to some of these slides, there are some guidelines to help your students understand and remember. First of all, make sure you have their attention. Use a signal, practice it with your students. Then help students separate essential and non-essential details. This is really important, and it's a life skill that we can use forever. Help our students learn to focus on the most important information, points that are repeating, and then help them learn to summarize objectives and relate material to objectives. That's a job that we as teachers need to do. Continually say, look, these are the objectives we have for this lesson. This is how this fits in with that. This is how your homework fits in with that, so that students can make the connection. And then also continually make connections between new and learned or background information, repetition, review, frequent practice, Present things in a clear and organized way. Check in with your students. Is that clear? Do you understand? Do you need me to go over something again? And then focus on meaning and not memorization. We don't need to memorize as much information anymore as we used to because it's all at our fingertips. We can get it through our smartphones and through the internet. So we need to help students understand that we're learning things for meaning and concepts, and we're not learning them just to have them memorized.